Welcome to an occasional series of Global Governance and Human Security PhD Alumni panels. Today's panel is on publishing. We bring you some alumni who have published well and successfully and present them to you for questions and your general edification. I'm Sammy Barkin. I'm the Program Director of the Global Governance and Human Security Program in the Conflict Resolution, Human Security and Global Governance Department of the John W. McCormick Graduate School of Policy and Global Studies of the University of Massachusetts, Boston. That's the long version. I'm going to moderate today our panel with Doctors Charla Burnett, Mimi Chase, and Jamie Hagan, who all have in common, among other things, that having had me on their committees, but nonetheless have gone on to successful careers. So there you go. Rather than have them give prepared presentations, I thought I'd just start off with a couple of prompts to get them talking and then open things up to more general questions and comments. I think I just start off with the question, what do you know now about academic publishing that you wished you knew in your second year of the GGHS program? And we'll take them in the order in which they appear on the little poster for the event. So let's start with Charla.
Thank you so much, Sammy. I'm really happy to be here to talk about this topic. It's really important to me. I'll be honest with you, and Sammy will remember this as I tell this little kind of story. I love to write and I think you should have to love to write to be an academic, because if you don't, you're probably in the wrong industry. But when I started my PhD program in my first semester, I was told that I had to rewrite all of my final papers or leave the program because they were not to academic standard. And so I went and I got a tutor out of the Writing Center, and I worked with the tutor every single week for an entire year. And now I have over 12 publications, including an edited volume coming out with Springer next month. And I was recently cited along with Karen Ross and Marcia Munt by the Executive Office of the President. So obviously I've come a long way, but I think the one thing that I wish I could have gone back and told myself in my second year was that academic writing is like a special language, and you have to understand how to fit into this very narrow box of writing. And there is a script that you can look at and kind of play off when you're publishing, particularly for journal articles. And so when you're reading through these journal articles, not just looking at the content, but the way that your arguments are structured and the way that the entire paper is structured. And I wish we could have a class that just specifically focused on that, because it really is kind of a niche. And once you get that kind of template down, you'll be much more successful in the future. The second part that I wish I would have told myself is that a lot of times feedback is subjective. And you could send a paper into one journal and you could get feedback from people and say that's absolute crap. And then send it into another journal and they're like, we love it, let's publish it tomorrow. So I think as academics, we have a tendency to be perfectionists, and I don't think you should wait to start getting that feedback from journals. I think you should publish things that you might think are not wholly finished to get that feedback. And I've used it before, and I know that they tell you, oh, if you get rejected, you shouldn't be trying to republish it elsewhere. I've never listened to that. So I think you should, and you should continuously get feedback. So yeah, hope that was helpful and not too taboo.
I think it was. And yes, if it gets rejected from one place, you should definitely, revise it, pay attention to the comments, but keep trying. Mimi.
Thank you, Sammy. Hello, everybody. It's also a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a true honor to be with all of you here today. So I wish I could go back to my first and second years, and there were a few things that I would have done not necessarily different, for much more of. I have been using EndNote as my citation software since my master's program, and I've been using EndNote throughout my PhD. But if I knew in my first to second years that I could use it for so many more things, I would have paid more attention. And when learning how to use that software very well, like I know it like medium, but I don't know like super well. I would like to have learned earlier on how to use that software very well for citations. And I would have used it for many other things aside from citations. One of the things that I regret nowadays not having done earlier is that I didn't have a centralized place where I kept all my readings and references for things that I thought were outside of my field. I used EndNote, and I had like my own organization for the things that I felt were really my niche field. So everything that was related to climate and the Amazon and water and like those things. And other things from other classes I took, other things I read, I felt like, oh, I'll never use that again. I'll never need that again. So I'll just not put it on EndNote. I'm just not going to organize it too carefully. And there are a number of things that I read and somehow lost over the years, and things that I wrote and lost over the years because I felt didn't seem too useful at that time for things that I could use in the future. And nowadays, I feel like if I had just saved those things. So I would have, if I could go back nowadays, I would have saved on EndNote all the syllabi from the courses I took during my PhD years. I would have saved on EndNote in separate folders the readings from all these courses, even the readings that I didn't do or that I didn't do too carefully. I would have saved my class notes, everything in there, because 3 years, 5 years later, I feel like, well, I know that I took a class that at that time didn't feel very relevant to my topic, but now my research scope is broadening a little bit. I'm going into different fields. And if I could just easily go back to the things that I know I read in my second or third year, but didn't save it, didn't read too carefully, nowadays it would have saved me a lot of time going back to that database and finding relevant sources for me to cite, finding relevant authors for me to tap into and find what are their latest publications, what are the journals that are in this field that now I'm approaching, and I don't really know where to start going into that field. So I would have saved in a centralized, organized manner a lot more things, because to be publishing is very much about having a conversation with other people in the field. And when we expand our research scope a little bit, we start having conversations with different groups and different hubs and different clubs of academics in different fields. So I think that publishing to me is also about keeping up with a conversation and having a conversation with these authors and these scholars. So it would have helped a lot had I saved more things so that I can start that conversation from not ground zero now, because now I'm starting like from ground zero. I'm like, where's the conflict resolution people are at? And had I saved that, it would have saved me quite some time today. So I'll stop here for now.
Thanks. Jamie?
Yeah, so I kind of want to pick up on the previous point. I still don't have an organized way of keeping citations. I do most of it by hand, and most of it is like parentheses, see citations, make sure you add citations later. However, I do have physical copies of pretty much everything I read in the program, and I brought them, and there's massive filing cabinets in my office at Queens. And I keep the syllabus and I look at that, and I continue to ask people for that and physically print it out and look at it. And it's like super duper helpful. So I think it kind of just depends on how you read and how you take notes and how you learn. So if anyone's kind of overwhelmed at the prospect of, oh no, now I'm all behind because I didn't do this, I think everyone has their different methods. And I think for a lot of reasons, I like having the printed copies that I've highlighted, and it's also a trip to go back to syllabus for my master's degree that I got at Brooklyn College and find out that actually someone I read is like now my colleague. And this definitely happens. So anyway, I think for me, the thing that's the biggest difference in terms of like what I know about academic publishing now is knowing and being an editor in different ways. So I see journals differently, and I see the way that special issues come together, and also the experience of being a reviewer a lot more. I think I'm a lot more generous with what I know. I'm a lot more generous with what that experience is. I have like such a memory of the anxiety of like the first, second, third, fourth, fifth time that I submitted papers, and just being like, oh my God, this has to be the most finished, polished thing ever. I'm like so afraid of this like going to the other side. But like now that I've been part of teams that have like received these papers and been part of like soliciting abstracts and papers, I'm like, no, please send. Like, we want to work with you, like, and obviously that's not the case. And that's not the case everywhere, which is why I think, I guess humanizing the journals to the degree that you can, like, do look at who's on the editorial board. And I think like start to get a sense of, I mean, that takes time, but I think just remembering that it's people who are doing the reviews, and it's people who are editing these journals. And like, yes, there's ones that we really, really want to publish in, and it makes like a huge difference in your career, whether or not like which ones you're able to publish with. But I think kind of taking a little bit of the anxiety out, and like, this is not just a journal, it is like an editorial board and reviewers. And so, yeah, that's just something that has changed how I think about publishing a lot. And also to that end, that is why it makes a lot of sense that if you're rejected in your paper because of its methodology, or because of whoever, whatever reasons the editors say no, it's a desk reject, or the reviewers say no, like there are other communities that it might be a better fit for, or there's, definitely lots of reasons to, I say this as I'm currently definitely sitting on something that was rejected that I should just turn around and send back out, but we do this. Looking for other places for the paper is also just about like, you're having a conversation in one space and it's not clicking, so you go to another conversation and you submit your paper and try there. So I do think of it very differently now that I like have been an editor and can kind of actually start to picture some of these editorial boards a lot differently than when I was, of course, initially like submitting to the scary like upload submit portal. I mean, it's less scary to me now, but it is still kind of scary when you're if you're precious about your writing. I'm sure none of us are. It's just kind of like remembering like it's people who are looking at this and kind of like letting it go, and not having as much concern about getting it all right first.
Thank you. I think I'm going to do one more round of me questions, and then open up the floor to our Zoom audience. So the second round question is, do you have any thoughts for how to navigate, how to think about publications at the same time that you're thinking about writing your dissertation? And let's do it the opposite order this time. So let's start with Jamie.
I feel like my case is kind of, I mean, I was approached to basically write a paper about something that's at the core of my dissertation, and that worked out quite well. After that, I will say that I kind of like had that paper, did the dissertation, and then like started throwing a lot of spaghetti at the wall with like a bunch of very different papers. I don't know if other people I've seen, Charla, like not, because there's this like publish, like, and like then several of them moved through publication, and that's great. But I think it is ideal, of course, to have something published that's at the core of your dissertation. But I think you then sometimes want to be able to play around with like, where do I want to publish? Where do I want to go? What different interdisciplinary conversations do I want to be a part of? But I do think boring, not fun reality is that you probably should publish something that's at a very specific intersection. And, like if you're wanting to talk to policymakers. If you want to be policy relevant, make sure that it's somewhere that's policy relevant. And I think that is really hard to do, I think, actually. And I think I would also say one thing that's like a huge thing that I learned is like, you don't have to do all the book chapters, like maybe one, maybe two. But I think, I don't know if everyone here had the experience of like, I think for good reason, a lot of handbooks and a lot of like edited volumes like want early career scholars. And I think like people are more apt to say yes, but I think when you're trying to like finish some things and like have some security, the book chapters can kind of, well, for me, I'll just say the book chapters kind of spun me out in a way where it was harder to sort of like feel like I was making more targeted decisions about where I was publishing. I feel like yeah, having the direction about where I wanted to go next. But then again, maybe that's just like the experience of like, you know, you are like trying to navigate like, yeah, which spaces do I want to have conversations in? But I think it is really challenging to navigate the like, I need to publish as much as possible, because that is not necessarily true. You should probably have like a bit of a target for where those publications are, and maybe the other two speakers can kind of like seeing head nods. So like maybe you can reflect on sort of how you navigated that, because yeah, the whole like I just want papers out there like resulted in some like kind of wacky submission choices.
And from wacky we go to Mimi.
Not that far away from wacky. So my dissertation and publishing experience was, I thought that it was off track, but now listening to Jamie, I'm asking myself if there is a track. I feel like we all have like our unique experiences of how dissertation and publishing come together, and maybe I shouldn't feel that there is like a standard way of doing it. I thought that the standard way of doing it was that either we have the book manuscript as a dissertation, or that we have the 3-article format, and these were the 2 parallel tracks and they didn't intersect, and they are not to intersect. And when mine intersected and weaved and crossed and I jumped from one to the other and then back to the first, I thought that that I was off the track. So my experience has been that I started in the very beginning, I thought it was a book because this is what academics do. And then I realized that it made sense to me to go on the 3-article format. And that's a kind of dissertation format and and publishing strategy that works well for me. I really like writing articles. I prefer shorter pieces than longer ones. It also fits neatly with the topics that I was talking about, because they were about something that in my head makes sense, but they were kind of like disconnected from each other. So the 3-article format made sense to my dissertation, and it also made sense for publishing, both because they're different topics and also because I prefer writing and just getting things done, and then shorter pieces are easier for that. So I started on that track, and then I had to move for a number of reasons, and ended up submitting a dissertation that's more on the book manuscript format. And I think that as far as publishing goes, my understanding is that those that are interested in or that have aspirations of publishing a full book have benefit from starting on that track during the dissertation time. And if they understand that publishing a book is the ultimate goal as far as publishing, I think structuring the dissertation along those lines of having like one very solid lit review that is comprehensive, that covers a bunch of things, and then having a few chapters that feed off of that lit review and add to that some empirical work or data collection or whatever it might be, and then have the whole thing be enveloped into one book format, it makes sense to structure the dissertation that way. my experience, again, I don't know if it was off track or just there's no track. I had different pockets of data and empirical work. And I was also talking to different fields, and I wanted to have different lit reviews for each of those fields so that I could adjust my data to each one of those. So I had the way that I was thinking about my dissertation and publishing was that for each of the pockets that I had that was going to be one of the 3 articles, that I would have one lit review for that package. And it was a lit review for a specific field, and I was going to use a specific data and method for that. And then another one that was a different lit review that was talking to a different audience about a different data and a different approach. My dissertation ended up being a mumble jumble of everything, but I think that, again, had I known what I know now, I think that strategizing dissertation and publishing is also a question of who is the audience that we are speaking to and what is the ultimate format that we want to get out of the publishing. If the ultimate format that we want to get out of the publishing is a book, and we're speaking mostly to one audience, I would say it makes sense to structure the dissertation and write a dissertation in the manuscript format. If we're speaking to different audiences, if we have different sets of data, if we're interested in different conversations, I would say it makes more sense to structure the dissertation along the 3 article format. But again, I tried to do that and I ended up having to switch back to the first. So that's my advice, but it's not what I did. So that's what I have for that question. Thank you, Sam.
Charla?
Yeah, so I would definitely say I feel very similar to the way Mimi and Jamie went about it. I think we made very similar assumptions and mistakes, but also it was helpful for us because we learned a lot prior to entering the job field. I definitely sent out a bunch of papers. Every paper that I wrote in class, I tried to morph into an article. And of course, that was a lot across a lot of different fields. But for me, I think it was different because I wasn't looking to teach. I wasn't looking to become a professor. So I wasn't as concerned about having a very specific discipline. And that is very important on the job market when you're going into to be an academic. For me, I'm more interested in the practice of international development. That's what I do at Michigan State University. I handle all the USAID contracts and I bring tenured faculty together to pursue international development projects. So I think for me, it fit well to have lots of different articles published in different subgenres of development. And in fact, I would say it was useful for me to work with other students and perhaps merge papers that we wrote together to discuss different arguments was very helpful. I also pursued writing opportunities in my fellowships and with our professors in our department because they're very open to working with students on that, which was really nice. I don't think that all departments are as open and treat students as kind of peers and colleagues once you finish your practice your exams and have defended your proposal. So that opened up a lot of doors for me to be able to do that. I also took part in a lot of the International Studies Association conferences and received feedback that way. When it came to my dissertation, I also went the route of Mimi. I was going to do 3 articles and I published the first one very quickly. It was actually in environmental engineering. And then I went to go publish the second one and it got caught up. And then COVID happened and it seemed all the journals got stalled and we were waiting over a year, to hear even a response about, feedback from other academics. So I ended up saying, I can't wait for this to go through the publishing process. I have to put it into a book format so that I can move on with my life and my career. And so I ended up then writing the book. Now, in regards to publishing my dissertation, instead of taking my book and publishing it, what I did is I sent in a proposal to Springer that outlined a methodology to have others come and use the methodology I had posed and write about it in their own chapters. And I helped to chair and found the International Society of Participatory Mapping, which was my dissertation focus. And so I was able to meet hundreds of researchers from around the world that worked in my field. And by working with them through those 4 years, I had gained their trust and was able to solicit 10 different groups of researchers and software developers to use my evaluation framework. And so we finished that process, and that took 2 full years of just getting them to turn it in. And then the editing process with Springer's taken almost another 9 months. So, when you're talking about publishing a particular edited volumes, you're looking at a very long time span. And I feel like sometimes that feels disheartening when you're in your PhD and you're like, I just want to finish. I need to go make money. I need to, live my life and be a professional in some capacity. So I think that that's something to consider too, and not to be discouraged if you get rejected on a full book. How can you take that book and the ideas and the outcomes that you, looked at in your research and get others to comment on it? So I would advise that as an alternative to getting your actual book or your articles published at the end of your PhD.
For what it's worth, I'm also in the middle of an editing publishing process with Springer, and I'm also having some frustrations at
They outsourced their last round of editing to a consultancy,
everything.
And I was not impressed.
Any questions or thoughts from the floor? Either verbalized or typed in chat.
I guess I should say that my publishing trajectory is actually quite traditional. I published 1 article in International Affairs, Queering Women, Peace and Security. That's the title of my book manuscript. It's currently with a developmental editor because I want to be able to talk across disciplines, and it's all written and but the process does take a long time. And I'm doing an edited volume, which is pretty directly related to the research that I've been doing, talking about queer conflict research. I mean, it's called queer conflict research. So, I mean, it's fairly by the book, but I do think that getting a job to especially when you're coming off probation and you're on this, I mean, for us in the UK, it's, I would say, a less heinous process to get to tenure. I'm technically essentially tenured now, but that oh my gosh, you're paddling. I want to publish while you've got, an edited volume or the book out. There's this kind of momentum to keep publishing something. And I think sometimes you can get, and also COVID happening can kind of mean I wrote, and also I sometimes write out of frustration, which is not the same. I mean, all of it's out of frustration, to be honest. All the things I write out are at some point of frustration, but also I wrote an article about queering internationalization, which was basically a subtweet about the admin role I was given in my first year as an academic. And these things happen.
Again, questions or thoughts from the floor? Okay, then I'll ask more questions. Some of you have touched on this already, but how do you think about writing for different kinds of outlets? How do you find the writing different? Do you find one kind of writing easier or writing and publishing easier or harder, etc.? Let's have Mimi go first this time.
I would say I reuse and recycle a lot. It is, to me, the hardest part of writing is starting it. I have a huge, I don't know, writer's block when I see a white page and a blank page in front of me, and it's just really hard to get started. So every time when I'm writing something, I try to pull things that I have written for different audiences in different times for different contexts. And somehow I try to use that as a way to get me started on the topic and then bring in new things to frame it to the new outlet that I'm writing now. So I sometimes it's as simple as, I don't know, a few paragraphs from a paper that I wrote for a course a few years ago, or sometimes it's, I don't know, a blog or something that it was just like a good piece of writing that I feel like, oh, okay, that this came out really well. I like this idea. Let me just take this into a different direction. So I recycle a lot. I think that writing for different audiences and different outlets is again about finding what's our voice in a different field or in a different subfield, in a different conversation. So I always try to find what are the other pieces in that outlet, in that blog or in that journal or in that field that I would want to engage with. And then I start writing, like really brainstorming drafts about how I would respond to that author's points and what is the data that I have that either complements that or that challenges that. And then I start pulling from a bunch of different little pockets that I only find these pockets, I only find these pieces of writing as I start the process of writing again. So the recycling and reusing happens as I am going through that conversation in my head of like, what would I say to this author? What would I say to this data? How could my data challenge or complement that? And then I start stitching and weaving things together. And then in the end, the things that I have reused and recycled are barely there anymore. Like I've changed things so much and I've edited, and the final piece looks pretty different from the first draft that had just a bunch of color-coded stuff that I pulled from different buckets. But for me, writing to different outlets is finding what is it that I have written in different places that can help me in this new outlet. And I managed to trick myself into writing when I'm faced with the shock and the block of the blank page by just reusing and recycling and then adapting it to a different outlet. So I hope that helps.
Charla?
Yeah, so in the past 5 years, I've had to publish in a lot of different venues, whether it be in local papers, as I got more involved in local politics in my home city, on social media for my consultancy and a nonprofit that I started. And so I found myself having to write like a lot of really short blurbs. And I started taking advantage of different types of technologies. And recently with ChatGPT, like my whole life has been revolutionized. And you guys, you shouldn't be writing your own references anymore. Just ask ChatGPT to do it. They'll be perfect. So that's something to think about as well. For instance, I want to write a paragraph to put in a post that I'm making on LinkedIn. I can go to ChatGPT and I can write a couple sentences about it and say, hey, write a paragraph about this and put it out, because it's not empirical like publications. You don't have to worry about that. Obviously, you don't want to ask ChatGPT to write an entire article for you, but it will. And so there's definitely some moral and ethical concerns around the use of this type of technology, but I found it extraordinarily useful. So let's say you're stuck and you're like, oh man, I don't know what to write about this specific topic. You can feed in past papers or things that you are interested in talking about and ask ChatGPT to pose questions to you about that topic to get you started in thinking about what you would want to write. Or let's say I'm having trouble on thinking about the outline of a paper. I can now just go to AI and ask them like, hey, this is my topic. These are the points that I want to make. How should I outline this paper? And it will provide you with an outline for your paper. So I think that we should use and try to harness technology as it's coming out, particularly AI and machine learning, and become better writers for it. And I think depending on the kind of avenue and venue you're trying to publish in, like it's not frowned upon to use it to change the tone of your language. You know, do you want your language to be more upbeat? You can literally put in 2 paragraphs that you're going to post on social media and say, hey, I want to make this more fun and exciting. Let me know. Or I want to make this seem more sensitive to the concerns of X, Y, and Z audience, and it'll rewrite it for you, thinking about the target audience and how you want to portray what you're trying to talk about. So if we're able to use these types of technologies to help us better communicate our points, then I think that we should utilize those, particularly in non like academic spaces where we have to be worried about plagiarism and things like that. So I've, and I also like publish websites, and I also publish dashboards with data analytics and things like that. Now I can just copy and paste a table and ask it to write the descriptive statistics for me, which I would have wrote the same exact thing in the same exact way, except now I just saved 15 minutes of my time. So definitely just like look into those types of things. I think it's really helpful, particularly with like brainstorming ideas.
Jamie?
I think I would say refuse this idea that academic writing isn't accessible to policymakers. I think academic writing is like a very broad category. And I definitely have a pet peeve of when people approach me and they tell me how they have an outlet they want me to write for because then it'll be policy accessible. And I'm like, may I introduce you to all of my writing? Like, yes, that's great. But yeah, I mean, like I wrote a piece for the Monkey Cage, and I definitely like the Washington Post, and it is definitely different eyes that you're going to get on these different spaces for sure. And it is very clear that, yeah, editors are kind of like trying to write the academic out of you, I guess. But at the same time, I would say that they're not binary. It's not like it's policy writing and academic writing. And I think so as always, I just try to find the community of writers who I know are navigating across both of those spaces. Most people in women, peace, and security are doing both. They're definitely doing policy relevant work. They're doing the work of being critical friends. They're working with a lot of them. I mean, how successfully is another story. But I do think that I like right now I'm in the process of writing a toolkit, and I think that's like a really interesting project of trying to think of what actually needs to be in there and how to make accessible resources. But at the same time, in a lot of ways, I'm just kind of re-saying, yeah, of course, like we've said, we're re-saying what we've already said in a lot of these different contexts. But I think for me, it's not even just that, it's like picking up on the assumptions people have and like writing to that. So I feel like I'm always just kind of like reshaping and narrowing, like with the assumptions I didn't realize people were going to have bringing to my writing. And so I do that across all the different spaces. But yeah, I mean, the citations are going to be different. And yeah, but I would also say that it also kind of depends on where, like if you're in the UK, they really do want you to have like impact. So and they like I'm able to say like I had this meeting with UK officials and I put this document together to inform the National Action Plan, and like that's valued. I co-direct a Center for Gender and Politics. We have policy briefs. I've done input for UN calls, and like the citation, yes, I've gotten into some UN reports, but also with the policy briefs, like probably, I don't know, some of them might be cited, but probably not. But it is something that I know people are much more likely to read and skim ahead of like calls or after meetings. And like how that's captured is going to be very different than, of course, the book or articles. And so I think having the privilege of writing that is really something I value, because I also think I've faced a lot of challenge of the standards that you're expected to meet in terms of like doing new queer work, I do think is different than what like new work in like kind of what I would say like fairly traditional middle of the road conflict res is. Like, so I've had papers rejected like multiple times that like, I just don't think if it was about something else, I'd be facing that same sort of thing. So that puts you in the like one, for me, it makes me like, well, I'm putting this policy brief together and getting it out there because you know, this is like important to be accessible now. So I'd say for that reason, being able to navigate finding, you know, writing for different audiences is really, really important, but it is a privilege because it isn't something that like in early career, like a lot of people really can put the time to necessarily, depending on whether or not that's valued. So, you know, except for maybe like the, you know, article for, you know, like the shorter piece, if you can get it in like the Washington Post or an op-ed in the New York Times or something like that. But yeah, that's kind of some of my thoughts about that. And I would also say like it's very, very challenging to have the, you know, in the very early, like it is to keep those commitments. I think it is really, really challenging. It definitely works to my advantage, as I said, that it's valued in the UK system, but I know like a lot of people really struggle with having that taken out of tenure files, which, you know, unfortunately feels like a broken record. But the group Bridging the Gap, which I did go to one of their summer training, like has a lot of suggestions and I think potential for co-authoring with people if you're wanting to find ways to continue to write across like policy and more like I guess academic spaces if we're going to buy this this mean totally separate spaces. But that's kind of my thoughts on that.
Thank you. We have in the chat a question from one of the several Brian Hardings in the audience. Who would love to hear a little on any tips for the revision process, navigating reviewer feedback and rejection. Anyone want to jump in on that? Mimi.
Thanks, Chris, for that question. It is, I think it depends on whether the revision is a desk revision or if it's I mean, it's a desk, generally it's a desk rejection. So when the editor of a journal accepts the paper and they send it to the reviewers, at that point, the editor of the journal believes that your paper can be published. And they send it to the reviewers and it takes time for the reviewers to get back to us. But my experience so far was that the reviewers wanted the paper to be published. I know that this is not always the case, and it's not it's not always the case. My sister is also an academic, and she experienced she's in economics, and apparently economics is very, very nasty as far as peer reviewing goes, and they are really after tearing the paper apart. This has not been my experience so far. All the anonymous reviewers that I've got for all my publications so far were reviewers that wanted to make my paper, my publications better and wanted to give feedback, which does not mean that we should accept all of them. I think some feedback is useful, and some of them were in fact appreciated, and I was able to incorporate them relatively easily because it's working for what the paper is. And sometimes I've gotten comments from reviewers that said, oh, you should add this, or you should consider this other thing, or consider this other approach. And those other comments would really have changed the paper from what it originally was and what I wanted it to be. And gentle pushback against those comments doesn't necessarily ruin the publication process. I've written back to the commenters. I don't know who they were. It's always through the editor, saying I don't think that this suggestion either makes sense or it's not very relevant, or if I did this, it would drastically change the paper. And I was able to get away with it. Again, I think it is a I believe Jamie, who's on the other side of the editor reviewer process, might actually be able to give us more insight into how that process works. But from an author's perspective, I have received good feedback from reviewers that I was able to incorporate. Most of them was feedback that was useful and easy to incorporate into the paper and made the paper better. And the few comments that I've received for a few publications here and there that I felt like those comments and suggestions weren't very helpful, I just explained why. And the editors still managed to get my pieces published, and it wasn't, I didn't feel that I should be afraid of pushing back on reviewers' comments out of fear of being rejected altogether. I think that when they give us enough feedback that they believe the paper is good and they want to get the piece published, pushing back on like one or two of their comments that are kind of like out there in left field is not necessarily a bad thing. So I did it, and I was able to get away with it. But again, maybe that's an exception, but it can work. I believe Jamie might give us more insights into that. So I'll pass it on to you, Jamie.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think I would just say that sharing comments with someone else as soon as possible, someone who's published and experienced a lot of rejection, is a good idea. And it's really hard. And I'm saying that like knowing how hard that is, but and I think it's really hard when you're like at the dissertation stage, because you may not know as many people that you're feeling comfortable to do that with. But I would say finding a couple of people, I mean, people in your committee, perhaps, but if not, just finding people within maybe an ISA like group that you're part of, caucus or something. I think that's a good way with the first paper or two. Also, hopefully you have really good editors that like, they do say like, this is what we think is not working. Here's how you might do it. I mean, obviously that's like a really generous, helpful review, which is what we hope for. Not always the case. I agree. Like, here's the reasons this is not relevant is totally fine. But also co-authoring has been super helpful for me to understand how to like move through revision, because it's a paper that we wrote together. So we have to think through how are we going to respond to this together. And that I think it has helped get me out of the way of like taking it all personally and all of that, which like we do. I mean, we're going to, but you know, how to move through taking it personally and then like making constructive next steps. So I do think, finding someone that you can like really share it with and kind of like, even if I actually think talking through them is very helpful rather than like email chains back and forth. Personally, I think like have a half-hour chat with someone who's like looked at it and looked at the comments, and then like, because I think a lot of the problem, if you've gotten to the point where you've got a paper through and you've got feedback, then like it's probably you being in your own way with your own like feelings about it, which is normal and fine. So I think rather than sort of sitting on it and stewing, maybe finding, you know, that like mentor that you can have the chat with, and then when possible, you know, I mean, because I think like co-authoring when you don't quite have your own voice and haven't had that experience yet, maybe you do want to hold off a little bit on that. But like now that I've had the opportunity to do more co-authorship, I do really value being able to sort of like process the revisions and the feedback together. And yeah, it's similar to what I was saying about the journals. I mean, like, whatever you can do to kind of like break away from this idea of like, I don't get it, everyone else knows what's going on, and like this is so unusual what's happening to me, like the sooner the better, because it can be quite lonely with your own thoughts and you know, an email from you know, R&R.
I just want to pick up and reinforce one thing that Jamie said, which is that like any other pattern form of communication, things like R&R letters have and appropriate responses to those letters have a set of norms that editors are going to expect you to know. And of course, the first time you go through the process, you don't know them. So do very much talk about it to somebody who does. The first place to look for this is your dissertation chair. whether or not you've already graduated. Just to make sure that the signals you want to send are the ones that are likely to get read. Charlotte, did you want to jump in on this?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to second what Jamie said. I don't think I've ever, after getting through the initial desk review, been rejected after that. You would have to like just not do any revisions at all and try to resubmit or just not turn in the paper again, which being on an editing committee now, I've seen people do that. So particularly if the process is very long and you have other papers to focus on. But I think in regards to rejection, the PhD program beat it out of me. And I honestly I got rejected today for a postdoc, you know, and honestly, I opened the email, I was like, okay, and just moved on. And eventually you're going to get that way. And it does, particularly with your dissertation, just feel horrible. Like if you go to defend your proposal the first time and they say no, like it's going to feel horrible. But it's usually for a good reason, and it's meant to be a learning experience for you. And so it's easy just to like take it back and be like, this isn't personal. This is, you know, something that I can actually fix if I take the time to work on it. And I think that that's easier said than done, of course. But I do think that rejection is going to be a way of life throughout academics for the rest of your life. And the quicker you get over it and just be like, you know what, we just don't vibe for that, or that wasn't meant for me, that wasn't meant for my path, and I'm going to try to find a different path, the more healthy you will be, mind, body, and soul in academia.
Thank you. Other questions or thoughts from the floor? I noticed that our illustrious chair has joined us, fresh back from his recent jaunt to Japan. Hi, Stacy.
Hello. Yes, I look like I've freshly jaunted from Japan, so I'll just talk instead of show you. I was just gonna say that I want to reinforce what Sammy said. Lots of these things are norm governed. Lots of your dissertation chair and, you know, other academics with, you know, other professionals that you work closely with have done this several times and many times. So just talk with people. And I think sometimes when things don't go the way we want, the inclination is to not share that, you know, to feel some sort of, you know, shame or, you know, like it's a failure and I don't want people to know. This is the wrong response. As Charlotte had just said, this is a career path, no matter which part, academic, research, think tank, applied research, all of it. It's a career path filled with rejection and therefore filled with opportunities to learn from rejection. So talk to other people about those rejections and how you respond and how you learn from them. And, you know, if it makes you feel better to do that on Zoom, do it on Zoom. If it makes you feel better to do it with a nice pot of tea, do it with a nice pot of tea. If it makes you feel better to do it with a beer or a glass of wine and rage and shake fist about a stupid reviewer, do that. All of those, you know, like, you know, just process these things the way you do. And they're, as we can joke, they're all learning opportunities.
Thank you. New question from Bismarck. Blind review. Do you think we should be using a double-blind review process, or should we get rid of blind review and have actual named review? Any of the three of you have thoughts on that?
As somebody, like I'm sure Jamie can attest to, who's been on the editorial committees of journals now, I think it can be great because there are some biases involved, but I also sometimes wish that we didn't have it, particularly when we're working with people from non-native English speaking countries, because if we don't ask those questions about where they're from, sometimes we brush over them and think, oh, there's grammar mistakes, like they need to just go back and do something about it. Whereas like I'd rather spend time with them and work them through the process so they can get it ready, as long as the research is sound, and the evidence is sound. So I think that there are pros and cons to both, but I think there's strategies for which we can ask strategic survey questions prior to submission and have it be blind, but not blind in a way. So I think changes need to be made, but I think they need to be strategic so that we're then not allowing reviewers to be biased in other ways.
Thanks. I should note that a lot of journals are starting to do this, and this is something that a good editor can stay on top of, either by telling you to review for content because the author is a non-native speaker, or by reading reviews in that context. Of course, this all creates more work for editorial staffs who are doing this unpaid. But it goes with the territory. Mimi or Jamie on this subject?
I was a few weeks ago at ISA in Montreal, and one of the panels I was chairing had a group of scholars who work in peace methodologies and nonviolent conflict, nonviolent responses to violent conflicts. And one of the things that we were discussing in the Q&A was how wonderful and different would it be if the review process for journals had at least one reviewer who was a practitioner, and how would that change the way that we write our pieces, and how would that change the field? How would it change our scholarship? So I think that goes along with the question of thinking, how could we revise the double-blind peer review process? And there are issues with it, and yet I think it's, along with what Sammy and Charla just said, that it's important to think about, like, what's the background of the author. If we had the ears of the world of academia and journal editors, I think it would be an interesting thing to consider as well, to add reviewers who are practitioners. I do think that it should stay, to answer specifically the question that Bismarck asked, I think it should be a double-blind peer reviewed. I think that the editor shouldn't be double-blind. The editor should know, and he or she or they do know who are the authors and the reviewers. But I think the reviewers and the authors should stay apart, because then it becomes a conversation that's truly about the piece and not about who we are as people. But I think there's ways to mitigate implicit biases and how our own identities and how our own ways of approaching our scholarship shows in our comments as reviewers and our writing as scholars. But I think it should be double-blind. I feel protected by that system. It's not perfect, but it's better than knowing who the editors are and they knowing, the reviewers. I would prefer that the reviewers don't know that I am me. And I don't want to know who they are either. But I'm glad that the editor knows, and that the editor can do their magic behind the scenes to pair us. I also wish that the editors did more pairing with practitioners who have PhDs and are scholars and are understand academia, but also understand the world of practitioners, for those of us who are publishing in journals that have that kind of audience. So these are my 2 cents.
Yeah, I would say I think there's a real value in having the blind peer review. And I also think it's good to know that you can say you can let editors know who you do not want to review your paper. I did not realize that, not that it's been a problem, but when I learned that, I do like to pass that on because I think, yeah, I think for yeah, in different contexts, it really matters to be able to say that. I think also some journals do ask for recommended reviewers. So I am editing a forum for alternatives, and they asked, who do you suggest as reviewers? Partially because there were 6 different pieces, and so they needed, 12 plus reviewers. So in that instance, they were, I don't know if other people have had, I don't know how often that happens. And previously I haven't recommended reviewers except when I don't have the capacity to review a certain paper, or for a different reason don't think I should review it, I'll then recommend other people. But all of that to say that there are ways to also support the work that you're putting out there, and work with the editor to just be like, of course you're having to put some trust in the editor, a lot of trust in the editor actually, which is what we're doing when we're choosing which journals we're submitting to. So I would say, and some journals, I think like Narrative Politics, it isn't a blind peer review. You know who's reviewing your paper. I think that's quite unusual, but I think it's all transparent, and that's not always amazing. So, but if that's something you want, try it out there, see how that goes. And yeah, I would just say that, knowing that in some instances you can, I think in all instances, if you're concerned about, especially if you're publishing in a field where that there do tend to be like a pretty short list of people that it's sent to, if you know that I really don't want this to go to this person because perhaps of a review that you've received previously or something like that, it's good to know that you can say, please do not send it in this direction. Thank you. Yeah, I think those are kind of the main points that I've kind of picked up as I've mostly heard other people talking about their experiences of moving through paper review and rejection that I like to pass on.
Thank you. I should note for the record that most article publishing in the academic end of our field is double-blind review. Most book publishing is single-blind review. So your reviewers know who you are. You don't know who they are. This actually has a bias of making it easier for senior people with track records to publish and harder for junior people without track records to publish, which is to say it works well for me. So not commenting, just putting that out there. Question from Denise. Can you speak to your process of thinking about your research? Oops, it just moved. For more practical applied uses versus primarily academic research. What are the implications of working on these applied projects for your careers? We've already touched on this a little bit. Anyone want to add to it?
I think just real quick, it depends on what's the career. I think I'm just starting a tenure track here in the US, and the only thing that counts is academic writing. I think Jamie spoke about how policy writing is relevant for academia in Europe. Charla is in university, but not in an academic career. So I think it depends on what's the career that you're trying to build, and what is the expected track record of publications for that career. So that's the only thing I would add to everything that we just said up until here.
I would say it really changes which spaces I get to go to too. But again, like, it's because my department, like, they want me to be going to a conference that the UK is putting on preventing sexual violence. Like, that's the sort of thing that like is valuable for them as an institution to have me attending this meeting. And I've been able to go to more UN events, and now I'm invited to a strategic session, and there's no way, I mean, also, by the way, I got bought out of teaching for a year because I have a British Academy fellowship that allowed me to full-time focus on developing this toolkit, which is very directly related to the research, the manuscript, the articles, and the book chapters. But I wouldn't be able to be moving in some of these, like working with some of the civil society organizations like Christian Aid and Colombia Diversa, where I've been able to go to Colombia and work with them in Colombia, I mean, that's just not something that I would have had any capacity to do if I didn't have this grant, which is developed to bring policy and academic folks to like work together on a project, which is quite unique and is really fantastic. Although I don't know, Charlotte, maybe you're fine, maybe USAID projects, I think you said USAID, support that type of thing, but it's unusual, right? I mean, we know it's sort of like cliche to say that academics don't really have time to, well, people on the policy side don't have time to be doing the writing up, and that people in the research, the academic side, like have more of the writing up time, but aren't necessarily connected. So to support research and support the time to do that is really has created, and also, by the way, the policy folks I work with, they all have PhDs and like law degrees. I mean, they're not, like I said before, they're not like, it's not exclusive. I mean, all the women I'm working with at Columbia University all like have law degrees, and also like probably, or some of them are teaching. So I just want to like put that out there so we don't have this kind of like expert versus like, you know, practitioner division happening. But yeah, I agree. It definitely depends on the trajectory of what career you want to make. But I do think there are more opportunities. It seems like there's more opportunities now to go after the funding where you can work together. And I mean, I don't know, but it seems like there are more of those funding opportunities where if you want to do the academic writing up stuff, but you want to be in community with practitioners, civil society, like there are funding initiatives that you can go after for that, which I think are great, because like I said, you can move in different spaces, which really for me energized me to continue doing the academic work, because you do immediately, like as soon as I started working at Queens, like I'm an academic, which is like not the only way I see myself, but like when you enter a room and when you sign an email, like that is how you're seen. So to have the ability to move in these different spaces is like a really makes a big difference for me personally, but also like obviously in terms of the relationships I'm able to build.
Yeah, I just want to second kind of the point that Jamie was making about politicians and policymakers. They claim they don't have time to read what we write in an academic forum, and they want something synthesized. And I understand that. I mean, I just think that that's lazy policymaking in general. But for me, my whole life, I've just wanted to be able to reach the people back home. And I come from the middle of America in a low income community that are probably a part of that, 75% of people who never pick up another book after high school. So reaching them has been incredibly difficult and trying. And that's why I've been going on podcasts and doing like doing audiobooks and doing things like this, because I think that it's more digestible for people in the go. From the communities that I'm trying to reach. So I just think it's really important to think about your audience and who you're trying to get a point across and why you're trying to get that point across. I know I've handed my papers to my own mother who never finished reading them because she simply said it's too hard for me. I don't understand what you're talking about. So to know that what we do write about is not always digestible for every audience is really key. And for me personally, and I mean professionally, for USAID, the missions are usually making the final decision about a proposal. And these missions are located in country all around the world. And some of them have higher levels of understanding of specific topics, and not all of them are going to be technical experts at those missions in the specific field. So I'm working with tenure faculty in engineering, agricultural and food science, machine learning, like all across the university. And I have to take and translate what they're talking about, what they want to do to solve global challenges to reach those people in the missions. So it's about translating scientific speak into something that's digestible, that I think is important. But there are academics who don't care about that, and they just enjoy talking with other academics, and that's okay. But it's really about, and Sammy knows, and we all know that that's what Sammy likes to do, and there are other people like Sammy, and that's okay. But if you're looking to have an impact on a specific target audience, make sure that you're spending time with them and that you're asking for their feedback, so that you can understand and ask them strategic questions like, hey, what do you think about this specific part of it? And if they can't have a conversation with you, you're not making it digestible for them.
Thank you. See, we and Charlotte, thank you for the validation. So we have a comment from Brian, but it's a comment, not a question. Though he does note that it's from the real Brian Harding, which I think is what we should call him henceforth. He does mention practice, which is worth stressing. Writing is like anything else. The more you do it, the better you get at it. This is even more so true of copy editing. You need to get into the practice of reading your own stuff critically. Always get other people to do it as well, but do it first so that other people aren't wasting their time finding your bad sentence structures.
Okay, why is this targeted at me right now, Sammy?
It is not targeted at you.
I'm kidding. I will say, like, I do ask my partner to read some of my things, and I did hand over something that has a lot of those parentheses citations to be filled in later right now today. So it felt really personal, but accurate. Very good point.
Well, we don't have any more questions from the floor at this point, so I will just see if anyone has any last words they want to leave us with.
Mimi, go ahead.
Thank you. For me, writing the dissertation and a few of the publications that I got out while dissertating were done thanks to writing groups, and they worked so well for me. I think it's, again, there's no silver bullet, neither for writing nor for publishing. We all have to try out different things and see what works. I was really skeptical about the idea of being part of a writing group. I felt like, oh no, this is not for me. It doesn't feel right. I don't think I would like it, and I resisted saying yes when I was invited to one, and I was like, oh, maybe I'll just do it just so that they stop nagging me, and then I'll just tell them that it really didn't work, as I knew it was not going to work, and that I'm going to drop out of the writing group. But then I tried. And trying new things is so magical every now and then. For me, writing and being part of a writing group was really productive. It was really nice to overcome writer's blocks and just have a commitment and keeping myself accountable and keeping others accountable. So I'm very thankful to everybody who peered up with me and teamed up, and we had different writing sessions together. I had a schedule with 3 different groups, and on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I was writing with different people at different times, but it worked really well. And I think that this is true both for dissertation and for publications at large. And I would encourage people to at least try it. I resisted saying yes first, and I should have said yes earlier on. So just try different things, try everything that comes our way, because some things might work even though we don't expect them to work. Charla, go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted you earlier.
No, not at all. I just wanted to again reiterate that, I think, I don't know about Jamie, but I know me and Mimi, we cried in our PhD multiple times about feedback that we received from our committee, from journals, and that I just want everyone to know that, like, you're not alone. If you just break down in tears and you're like, I'm gonna quit, like, I can't do this, I'm not meant to do this, you're gonna find that point sometime, and if you don't, you're just a genius, and you just really don't exist here. But I think that just knowing that, again, this is going to be a part of the academic experience for the rest of your life, and is moving as quickly into brushing it off as possible is going to help you, your mental health, your clarity, your relationships with other people. And just always take it as a grain of salt, because what one person doesn't like, somebody else is going to, or it's a learning experience and it's great for you to step up and learn that lesson. So I just want to reiterate that, like, I wish I just could have gotten into that mode much quicker, because the first 2 years were very difficult.
Jamie, do you want a last word?
Sure. Yeah. Did I cry? Yes. Do I still cry? Yes. It turns out that writing takes a very long time. And I do think that I've definitely gotten better at writing. It still takes a really long time. And I think I can write some things quicker, but it's also just like, as you expect more from yourself, I mean, the writing is still going to take time. I don't know. I think I kind of have a mantra to myself, like, writing takes the time it takes, and it's longer than you think. And yes, writing groups are great because I think it's just one, like I was talking about earlier, it really can kind of help you be in community as you're like going through some of the things, with whether it be just like meeting a writing, like word count, or being able to process some of the feedback that you got on an article. I would say I organized a writing group here at Queen's. We also did some writing retreats, and sometimes the writing retreat was literally like people sleeping a lot and having food, and then just like, yes, they had their writing goals, but like a lot of it was, being able to kind of like take care of themselves, because it is, we put really high expectations on ourselves for this work. I mean, finishing a dissertation is hard. Writing in academic spaces is hard, but doing it in community makes it easier. And I absolutely agree with Stacy that, fight that urge to kind of, sit with it alone and reach out to, start the writing group if you're not in one yet, because that will make your life like a lot easier. And so thank you for inviting me to speak about this, because you can very easily kind of like go off on your own with your writing projects. So it's good to kind of like be able to reflect about the experience and connect back.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Jamie, Mimi, Charla, for joining us, for sharing your thoughts with your more junior colleagues, with the next generations of GGHSers. Thank you, everyone else, including the many, many Brian Hardings, for coming. Yes.
Thanks, Sammy.
Thank you so much for
Thank you,
joining us.
Kelly.
Thank you so much. This was fabulous. I learned a lot. I know nothing about publishing.
Thank you, Sammy. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Stacy, for organizing. Thank you, Charla and Jamie. It was super wonderful to be with you today. And thanks everybody for joining us. This was amazing. Thank you
Always
all.
good to see our family members.
Yeah,
Thanks
familiar
all.
faces.